Hey everyone, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us again this week on Out of Character, a show where your favorite characters drop out of character for an hour to talk about your favorite creators. Drop out of character for an hour to talk with game designer and host Marc Tassin, that'd be me, about their art, their process, and the nerdy stuff that inspires them. So from the secrets behind their craft to the ins and outs of the business to the games, shows, and books that they can't get enough of, it's a unique and candid look at the folks who create the stuff that you and I love. So now comments will be open on Twitch throughout the show. So if you have anything you want to ask us or add, go ahead and drop that in. We're going to be keeping track of that throughout, and we'll try to pull in some of your comments. But in the meantime, let's not wait any longer. I'm very excited to introduce our guest, David Mack. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Hey, so thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell folks a little bit about yourself, about what it is that you do?
I am a media tie-in writer, mostly. I've done a lot of work for Star Trek over the years. My association with Star Trek goes back to 1995 when I wrote for Star Trek Deep Space Nine on television. Back in those days, I worked with a co-writer, a fellow named John Ordover. We wrote a couple of episodes of DS9 together. After that, I shifted gears, went into the books. I've done short fiction for Star Trek. I've done reference works. I have pretty much written for everything, novels, live theater, you name it. I've done it for Star Trek at this point. Everything except feature film, really.
I may have to ask about live theater at some point. But
yeah, we'll get into that. That didn't come together, but for a whole bunch of reasons. At this point, I have finished writing 30 novels for Star Trek, full-length novels. That makes me the third most prolific author of Star Trek novels in the history of the franchise. I am exceeded only by Michael Jan Friedman, who has 36, and the venerable Peter David, who has 45.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, so you've got you're not too far off of second, but first place is quite a ways at the moment.
Probably not going to hit that. He had the advantage of working back in the days when there were 2 Star Trek books a month. If you could write fast, you could rack up credits fast back in the 90s. I came to the game too late. And
let me clarify here. Should I be addressing you by your new title of Grandmaster David Mack? You were just acknowledged for all the work that you've done in tie-in. And just to let folks know, tie-in fiction and media tie-in fiction is when you're writing books for, say, related to your favorite TV shows or games or, things like that. Anytime you're tying into another media property. But you are now a grandmaster, right?
According to the International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, also known as the IAMTW.org, they have named me this year's Grandmaster. I believe I am the 15th. I think it's 15 years they've been doing this now. I have been preceded by many icons in the field, including Peter David, Kevin J. Anderson, Timothy Zahn, my good friend Keith R.A. DeCandido, Max Allen Collins, and many others whose names escape me now. But the idea is that I'm among some pretty august company in having been named a Grandmaster, and it kind of floored me. I first of all, I had no idea that I was even being considered, and I had no idea that anybody even thought that I was operating at that level.
Right.
So it kind of took me by surprise. I'm floored. I'm honored by the award. They call it the Faust Award. And I'm still, I guess the word I'm looking for is gobsmacked. I'm still a little gobsmacked.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it's a fantastic honor, and
it is
very well deserved, as I'm sure all your readers are sitting there going like, well, yeah, we totally get it. It makes sense to us, right?
I think that what really I love most about it is that it's an award that is granted by my fellow peers in the industry. It's granted by other media tie-in writers. The organization is by media tie-in writers for media tie-in writers. So this, isn't something that just, is decided on randomly by whoever. This is an award from my peers, my colleagues, and that means a great deal to me to know that they felt that I was worthy of this honor. It's really just remarkable.
Yeah, well, that's fantastic. Congratulations on that. That's very well deserved and very awesome.
Thank you.
So we're talking about media tie-in, And it sounds like, for the most part, most of your work has been in media tie-in.
Overwhelmingly, yeah. I'd say out of 37 novels, I believe 31 have been media tie-ins. I've written some original novels, urban fantasy. I have my Dark Art series, a tour, which includes The Midnight Front, The Iron Codex, and The Shadow Commission.
Look at me, ready to show these to you.
Look at that, right on the money. I love it. I don't know if you have the older cover from The Calling. That was my first original novel, published by Simon & Schuster. Well, look at him scramble, folks. He doesn't have it.
No.
He doesn't have it. It doesn't matter.
Joking?
There it is. He's got it.
It is.
Yes. Kidding. He was prepared. No, but yeah, so The Calling was my first. And you could make an argument that The Calling and the Dark Art series actually operate in the same fictional universe, just in different eras. The Calling is set in the early 2000s, whereas Dark Arts takes place from the beginning of World War II in 1939, World War II in Europe, I should say, through maybe the end of 1963, early 64, with the Shadow Commission, which mostly centers around the Kennedy assassination.
Okay.
So it's two different, very, very different eras with very different focuses. But I think someone who was really digging into the text might realize these could be the same universe.
Right. Now, the most recent Dark Arts, that came out relatively recently. Is that true?
It came out on August 11, 2020, just as the pandemic shut down the whole world. Essentially, it came out at a time when it was impossible to go anywhere, do anything, or promote anything. The supply lines around the world were collapsing, so you couldn't get copies printed, and if you could get them printed, you couldn't get them shipped. Needless to say, this did have some negative impact on the performance of the book. It did not reach the audience that I had hoped it would. Had I been able to do the promotional tour that I wanted for it, maybe things would have been different, or maybe it still would have tanked. I have no idea. I'm still proud of it. I know it didn't exactly burn up the charts, but I really love the work I did there, and I hope the fans will give it a shot.
One thing we have talked about that a lot of folks don't know is the amount of effort that the author themselves has to put in the promotion on books. That a lot of folks think that, oh yeah, Tor or somebody published it, and now you just sit back and watch. It's like, no, there's a lot that goes into it, and when you can't go out and promote that book, it's hard to get people to find what you've done.
It hurts sales when you can't get out there, when you can't promote it to people, take it to cons. It does make a difference to be able to just, as they say, show the flag, show up, and just talk about it. And people get to know you, they hear you talk about it, they hear the enthusiasm, and they get interested. And if you don't get that opportunity, I did a lot of podcast interviews, but it's not the same as feeling that infectious energy when you're talking to somebody in person. And I was always very good at hand selling the books. The first couple of books, I would just go and I would hand sell. I would stand at the bookseller's table at Gen Con or Far Point, Shore Leave, whatever, and I would just sell these books. I would stand there and promote them and hawk them, and I would try to make eye contact with people as they pass the table and give them a quick pitch. I sold a lot of books. I actually one time, actually more than once, I've sold out the stock that the retailer had at a convention just because I was relentless. I would put in hours standing there hand selling the book. And, that was just the business. That was just how I did things. But I wasn't able to do that for Shadow Commission, and I'm really sad that was the case.
Yeah. Well, I think that you're talking about this hand selling, and I think sometimes in this day and age, we forget how important still word of mouth is. How important one person telling their friend, going, "Dude, you should check this out. It's awesome." Do you agree that that's sort of not as much valued as it really needs to be? Because it still seems pretty important to me.
It seems like it's the way in which most people find books, like real readers who engage with the material. I think most of them find it through word of mouth. Somebody else they know has read it, has loved it, says, "Hey, you know what? I know what books you love. You're going to love this one. You ought to read this one." It makes a difference when a friend hands you a book and says, "I've read this. I think you're going to love this. You should get this."
Yeah.
It makes a difference, as opposed to you're looking at it on a website. The description sounds compelling, but you're like, I don't know. Maybe it takes a lot of time. It takes somebody you trust, someone who's within your circle of trust who will vouch for it. And that's when all right, maybe this is worth, 10, 20 hours of my time.
Yeah. We've got such a flood of new content to consume as fans of this stuff, or as anyone these days. I know that it impacts things like titles that you're putting out on your own when people are self-publishing and things. Does it affect things like tie-in novels these days, do you think? Do you think that Star Trek has to fight its way to the top just like everybody else does, for example?
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely competition for shelf space, for bandwidth, just for reader attention. And a lot of it is, who's better at marketing their brand online and in the streaming wars. And I think, it's one of those cases where, as much Star Trek is out there, somehow the press just cares more about Star Wars. Every time I see, finally we get some good coverage for, deserved coverage for Trek, and we still seem to be, getting out storied on like IO9 or whatever 2-1 in favor of Star Wars. I'm like, we're in a golden age of fantastic Star Trek content. Why are we not getting the love? I mean, come on, guys. You got Strange New Worlds, you got Prodigy. We're doing some amazing stuff here.
Yeah. And so speaking of Strange New Worlds and Prodigy, I mean, this is great stuff. I'm not going to give any spoilers here, but I mean, both of these are like great shows, and you're enjoying them as much as anyone else, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't hurt that I worked for Prodigy. I was an expert Star Trek consultant. I worked for them on their first 20 episodes, of which I believe 10 have aired.
Okay, hold on. What is this expert Star Trek consultant? What does that mean?
Basically, I'm what is called an SME, a subject matter expert. Mm-hmm. And the reason I was brought in originally by the Hageman brothers, the show creators on Prodigy, was that they had a basic familiarity with what is Star Trek, but deep knowledge, continuity, where the bodies are buried, etc. That they didn't know. And so my job, I was brought aboard when I was introduced to them, and I sort of did an interview. And the way I explained it to them was, my job is to be your Star Trek Sherpa. You have this summit that you want to climb, and at the top of it is the show you're dreaming of bringing to the world. My job is to help you find the best route up the mountain, the one that will help you bypass all the crevasses, all the dead traps, all the dead ends, find you the fastest route up, the best route up, get you to the top, get you where you want to go, and then when it comes time to pose with the flag, my job is to step out of the way. I am your Star Trek Sherpa. My job is to lighten your load. My job is to carry certain burdens of deep institutional knowledge so you don't have to. I'm there to simply make notes and say, this would a more Star Trek-y way to say this might be this. Or, I see what you're doing here. Torpedoes are the wrong weapon to use in this circumstance. You would use phasers because, and you would use them in this way, and here's how the dialogue would go for that. So that was the sort of thing I did. And then they would have questions. They'd say, well, we want a character who's like this or like that. What would fit that in the Star Trek paradigm? And I would say, well, you would want this or you'd want that. And I was surprised at how many of my early suggestions, because I was brought in at the development phase. Like, they had me consulting with them before they made the final show pitch to Kurtzman. So I was involved from a pretty early phase on Prodigy, and I was really just amazed at how much of my input the Hageman brothers were able to integrate into their vision. And so I had a wonderful time working on Prodigy with them, with the other writers. And I remember seeing that show come together, and the first time I watched the pilot episode and saw it real on the screen after having read it in scripts and seen it in lookbooks for months and months, I'm not ashamed to say it, a tear came to my eye. I got teary-eyed watching this come to life. It was, seeing it and hearing it, it was more beautiful than I had even hoped. And I got very emotional.
Oh, very cool. Well, and I'm sure you say things too, like, there's a cliff over there. Another guy walked off it. You should not.
Yeah, don't walk off that cliff. There's nothing for that one but pain. You don't want to go there.
Well, and with animation, do you see less up front? Like, I mean, I know that when they're filming a show, you could probably get a picture of what's happening on set and things like that. But with animation,
so, you'd be wrong.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. I've never done this, right?
Yeah, I was sort of an unofficial, uncredited consultant on Discovery on the early seasons. I was giving notes on season 1 because at the time I was working on the first Discovery tie-in novel, and we were doing our best to try and make certain that the novel would track with the first season of the show. And so you would think that there would be that kind of information, but very often I was getting very little. They were giving me as much as they could, but sometimes there just was no information to be had. And so very often things happen at the last minute. Sometimes things come together in post-production. You often don't really know what something's going to look like. And then the inverse of this, which, again, you don't find out. You're reading the scripts. You're giving notes on the scripts. There's only so much information in the script. And then you have people like the effects teams who are doing things like they're designing starships. They're designing star bases, designing effects. And they have to start, because it's such a long lead time on visual effects, they're starting really early in the process off of early story documents, off early draft scripts. And they're not always getting, again, the level of expert Star Trek feedback that they should. What happens is you get to a point in the episode making process where finally other people are seeing.
Looks like David is
work. It shouldn't be that design.
We will continue talking about Star Trek.
We can't.
Unfortunately, it looks like David got stuck in the transporter buffer. So we'll see if we can get him out of that. Let me see if I can beam him back onto the show. Excellent. We beamed you back. You got stuck in the transporter buffer, and we had to try to get you out, but you're back now. So
yeah, we went boom.
We did.
Not sure how we went boom, but we went boom.
Yes, we did. But we're back now, and that's good.
Let's move on from Trek, and let's move to something else.
Yeah, no problem. So, okay, well, I want to talk. You're talking about scripts. I want to talk about something that I've never talked about with one of the writers that we've had on our show, which is fan fiction. And you wrote some fan fiction. Was this the first time you've done fan fiction, or would you?
First time I'm admitting I've written fan fiction.
Okay, for the first time you've admitted to writing some fan fiction. Tell me about your fan fiction writing.
Yeah, I mean, I think like many writers, I had dipped my toe into fanfic of one stripe or another back in, say, the 90s when I was first starting out. Nothing that I ever posted anywhere, nothing I ever showed to anybody. It was just something I did for me, and I put it away, and that was the end of that. But I understood the impetus behind it, which is you love something so much that even if you know you can't work on it officially, you can't be part of the team, you still want to create something. You still want to tell a story in that universe with those characters. You love it so much that even if you know it's never going to be a job, you got to do it anyway. And I finally kind of succumbed to that. I felt that so much. Over the last couple of years, I have become a total nerd about Letterkenny, this Canadian TV show created by Jared Kiso, written mostly by him and the director Jacob Tierney and a few other guys. And I love this show. I went to see Letterkenny live when it came through New York back in April. And the show basically was like a lifeline to me. Back, I discovered it. I was late. It I guess premiered back in like 2015 or something. And I didn't really find it until 2020. And the reason I found it was that 2020 for me, like many people, the onset of COVID and everything, it was a hell year. Yeah. But it really hit me in the teeth because in January of that year, Neil Peart, my creative idol of like 40 years, died. Oh, and then my mom died in April. And at the same time, a good friend of mine, Dave Gallanter, a fellow Star Trek author, was losing his battle with cancer, and it would eventually take him at the end of the year. So I reached a point where after my mom died, nothing was funny anymore. Yeah. Nothing could make me laugh. And then I found Letterkenny. And suddenly, here was this thing, this light in the darkness. Right. Somehow it hit me. And I guess it's because I grew up in a little farm town in western Massachusetts, just as Jared Kiso grew up in a small agricultural town called Listowel, Ontario.
Mm-hmm.
And so the town of Letterkenny is inspired by Jared Kiso's experience growing up in Listowel. To me, watching it, it felt like I was looking back into my childhood, to the town I remembered growing up in. And I guess I gravitated to Letterkenny because it felt like home.
Yeah.
So I ended up doing some podcasts about, joining some guys who do podcasts about Letterkenny to talk about the new spin-off show, Shoresy. And it was a fun group of people I was talking to, and they love Letterkenny just like I love Letterkenny.
Mm-hmm.
And then we're doing a show where they were doing table reads, where they would get scripts from the show, and they would cast them, with their friends who were good at doing the character bits, and they would reenact the episodes. And they did a pretty good job. It was pretty funny. They all had a great time doing it. And we were talking about that when I was on their show, and I said, if I wrote a spec script for Letterkenny, and if it was, not completely embarrassing, would you guys be willing to table read it just for the hell of it? And they said, we think that'd be a hoot. We'd love to do that. So suddenly that lit a fire under me. Suddenly there was somebody who was willing to read the darn thing.
Right.
I wouldn't just be throwing it into the ether. So I got myself in gear, and I had this sort of idea kicking around in my head. And I pulled it together, and I wrote the spec script. I showed it to a couple of the podcast folks at How Are You Now, the toughest podcast in Letterkenny. Mm-hmm. They gave me some notes. I made some revisions, and now they're pulling together their table read team. We're going to rehearse it pretty soon, and hopefully in early July we'll do a recording. And they'll do it live. They'll do a live table read on Twitter, which I'll promote the hell out of.
Yeah, right.
So this is me going back into, dipping my toe publicly into fanfic. It's Letterkenny fanfic. There's no other way to describe it. It's not prose, it's script, but it's fanfic. It totally is, and I did it because I love it.
And I think, that's just it, is that fanfic, I'm always frustrated when people, talk down about fanfic, because the reality is that it's just a way to express your love about something, right? And you're just sharing it with other people who love it. And I mean, how cool is that at the end of the day?
It's very cool. And I think, fanfic gets a bad rep. And I mean, I do draw an important distinction. There is an important distinction between fan fiction and professional media tie-in fiction. And it really just comes down to, you have to deal with professional gatekeepers, and you need to get the approval of editors, and then the official license holder, the person who owns the copyright, has to approve it in order for it to be official media tie-in fiction.
Right.
That doesn't mean it's a better story. It doesn't mean it's better written. All it means is it's had to go through some hoops, and it had to be approved by the people who own the license, and generally it means that it has been held to certain standards, that it must track with the continuity of the core property as it exists at the time the thing is written.
Right.
But that's all it means. There are fan fiction pieces out there that are beautifully written, but they take their own sort of path to continuity, or they establish details that later run afoul of what the show did.
Right.
Doesn't make them any less beautiful. It just means that it's the kind of thing that the official line would never have published, because it requires you to make certain different dramatic assumptions. And then there's some types of fan fiction that don't fit the commercial mode, and that's okay. You write the fan fiction you write because it's what the heart moves you to write, and because there's an audience for it, and you share it with people who love that thing too, and that's awesome.
Yeah, that is very cool. And I think there's also, just to clarify, there is the line between, are you trying to make money off it, and are you just sharing it for the love, which I think is a given, but I like to mention it anyway. But I think that
it does matter.
Yeah, that part matters. But I do think that it's just fantastic that people are able to do that. And it's one of the joys of living in a world where the internet lets you connect with folks who are into what you're into, right? I mean, you can find folks who are doing this and just share your cool ideas, where it used to just be me and my buddy sitting in the backyard going, would it be awesome if this was to happen, right?
Exactly. If it weren't for the internet, if it weren't for Twitter and having hung out with these great guys at the How Are You Now podcast, I never would have probably gotten myself in gear to write the script. And I had such a blast doing it. I'm so glad that I met them, because it means I wrote this other thing, and then we're gonna put it out there, and hopefully other people who enjoy Letterkenny will say, well, it's not a real episode, but that was pretty funny.
Well, if you guys haven't watched Letterkenny, please do. It's a fantastic show. It is so good. You just won't be able to get enough of it. So You'd have
Absolutely.
him show. Well, all right. So now I'm going to get nerdy. So talking about sitting in the backyard with your buddies, going, you know what they should do? Like one of the things that we used to always say is we were always like, oh, Professor X should be played by Patrick Stewart. That he'd be the most perfect Professor X ever. And that one happened to come true. I don't think anyone was listening to us, but it came true. One that people have been talking about lately, and I had mentioned this to you before, is Jared Kiso. And people are like going, he should totally play Wolverine. He's Canadian, he's buff, he's good in a fight. You know, what do you think about when you think about like who would play parts in like a fan casting like that? You know, like Jared. What are your thoughts when you think about that sort of thing?
Well, I mean, I think that there's no such thing as the perfect character or the perfect actor for any character. I think you have to look at it in terms of what does this actor or that actor bring to the role? What kind of Wolverine would Jared Kiso be, as opposed to what kind of Wolverine would another actor be? Jared Kiso would be a fine choice because he's a terrific actor with a lot of range. He's good at serious. He's good at comedy. He's good at action. And, of course, he was a semi-pro hockey player, so he's pretty good at fighting. I think that he's also got that sort of taciturn, monosyllabic thing pretty good as Wayne. Yeah. Although, it would be fun. I think that he has the range, and he is sort of a chameleon. If you look at, for instance, his new show, Shoresy, where he's playing the main character of that, and it's a spin-off from Letterkenny.
Yeah.
Even though it's clearly him, when it's Shoresy, it's Shoresy. Shoresy is not Wayne. You would never mistake Wayne for Shoresy. They don't stand the same. They don't walk the same. They don't talk the same. They don't groom themselves the same. They have completely different viewpoints about life. Shoresy is a chatterbox. And Wayne, you're lucky to get 3 words out of him in a row. And it's because Kiso understands character. And he's a great actor. He understands physicality, voice. He uses all of the all of the instruments that he has as an actor. He brings them all to bear. So I think he'd be a great Wolverine. Does that mean another actor couldn't also be a great Wolverine? No, there could be somebody else who would also be a great Wolverine. It would be a different Wolverine, and that's cool. And I think that that's part of what's fun about it. That's part of why I've enjoyed watching different actors play James Bond over the years. It's not a question of is this person right for Bond or wrong for Bond. It's what kind of Bond is this person going to be? Sean Connery was one kind of Bond, and then you had a very different kind of Bond when you had Roger Moore. Then you bring in Timothy Dalton, dark, very serious. I love Timothy Dalton, but apparently he just didn't quite catch on. And then we got Pierce Brosnan, very polished, very kind of elegant Bond. Then, of course, we get Daniel Craig, Man of Ice and Steel. And a lot of people said Bond can't be, have fair hair. He can't be blonde. Well, sure he can. Watch him.
Right.
And I love Daniel Craig. Craig is my favorite of the Bonds. I make no secret of this. But it's not a question of was someone right or was someone wrong. It is what choices are they going to bring to the role? What what are they going to show me about this character that another actor wouldn't show me? So there's no such thing as the perfect person for a role. Someone may be great in a role. That doesn't mean they're the only person who could play that role.
Yeah, you're talking about what do they bring to the role. And I think that that's interesting because generally, like, I'll be honest, when as high school kids sitting around dreaming up who we were going to cast and we were watching Star Trek The Next Generation and we're like, oh my God, he should be Professor X. It's because he was bald and serious and he had the voice that I would expect Professor X to have, right?
Professor X.
Professor X. Anyway, I looked at that. But what you're talking about is a slightly different way of thinking about it. Like, you're talking about each actor bringing something. Like, what's an example of that? Of someone, like, what did Hugh Jackman bring to the Wolverine role, do you think? Because I will say that when they cast him, everyone was like going, that doesn't look anything like Wolverine. He's tall, he's clean-shaven, he looks like a musical theater person, because he was, right? And yet he brought something to the role that was different than someone else might. And I'm wondering, like, yeah, have you ever thought about that?
Well, first of all, I think that originally Jackman wasn't the first choice
Mm-mm.
I think what happened, I remember hearing that it had something to do with, there was an actor who was involved in Kubrick's film Eyes Wide Shut.
Okay.
And Kubrick was notorious for just taking forever, and he added like a year of reshoots.
Hmm.
And so he tied up the cast on Eyes Wide Shut for just ever. And as a result, I think I'd have to look it up. I may be misremembering. I may be conflating two different things here. If
Yeah,
I
sure.
have, I apologize. But as I remember it, because of what happened with Eyes Wide Shut, someone who was originally going to be tapped to play Wolverine suddenly wasn't available. It's like, sorry, can't have him. We've got him locked up. So they went to choice B. Well, call Jackman. And boom. Suddenly, this heartthrob takes the stage and redefines Wolverine. Wolverine, instead of being the short, stocky, cigar-chomping, hey, bub, blah, 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 suddenly is this tall, handsome, but still slightly primeval figure. And again, it was a matter of that's what he brought to it. He was able to bring a more debonair, more plausibly leading man style to the role without compromising what made it Wolverine.
Huh. Yeah. And I mean, I think that that's a different way of thinking about who they're going to bring, because too often I think we get in our, and I think that's a challenge that all fans have, right?
Hmm.
Is you get an idea in your own head of who a character is, and
Right.
then you struggle to see that different. The reality is that Wolverine doesn't exist. We're never going to cast, Logan doesn't exist. We're not going to find him to play himself in the movie.
That's
And
right.
it has to be someone who's going to bring something cool to the character that maybe we didn't expect along the
Right.
way.
I mean, look at the casting decisions that sometimes have to be revised on a show. Like classic example, when Voyager first started, they had cast Genevieve Bujold to play Janeway, and it didn't work out. It turned out it collapsed in like the first few weeks on set. She was a fabulous actor, but she was not mentally or physically equipped for the grueling pace of day-to-day shooting in television. She was accustomed to a slower pace in feature film. And the pace of television production just ground her down, and she couldn't do it. She just said, finally she just reached a point, she said, I'm sorry, I can't do it.
Yeah.
And they had to fall back, and they said, all right, all of that stuff we shot, out the window, we've lost it, we've got very little time. Who is available that we liked? Who else brought something interesting during audition? Who was the second choice? And they went, well, we have Kate Mulgrew.
Mm-hmm.
She's great. Bring her in, see if she's available, see if she wants it. She wants it. Great. She's available. Done. And now we have this very different persona for Janeway. Janeway would have been a very different character in the hands of Genevieve Bujold if Bujold had been able to keep up with the schedule. But she couldn't.
Yeah.
So we get a different actor who makes different choices, who brings a different energy to the screen, and therefore a different energy to every interaction, to every relationship. Very often, writers on a TV show, as you see the character relationships evolve from episode to episode, season to season, part of what they're reacting to is watching how the actors play. Sometimes, they start out with an idea that these two characters are going to be the best of friends, but then you find the actors have no chemistry, and they grate, and they just don't seem to work well in a scene. And yet you find every time you put these two together, well, sparks fly. It's like, well, let's put them together more. Let's explore that. Let's make use of that.
Difficulties of taking an existing property and moving it to screen. Because, I mean, it's great if you move Batman to screen, and, if you have Batman and Nightwing, or Batman and Robin, and they don't have the right relationship in real life on screen, what are you going to do, right? If you change the story, everyone's like going, well, that's not the story. But if you don't, everyone's like going, they're terrible together. And it seems like you really are kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Whereas if you've got the chemistry between, say, two leads who are fundamental, to the basis of a show, you've got gold. And for instance, my friends and I, we knew long before Star Trek Strange New Worlds happened, we knew it was going to happen because we saw the way that Ethan Peck as Spock and Anson Mount as Christopher Pike, we saw the way they interacted, not only on screen, but the two of them came to a convention in Maryland called Shore Leave.
Mhm.
and they were both guests there, and we got to hang out with them a lot. They actually both liked hanging out with the writers for some reason.
That's cool.
None of us know why. Actually, no, we do know why. Apparently, Anson Mount, in addition to his many other interests, is interested in writing and publishing short fiction.
Cool.
He aspires to be an author, and so we got to hang out with them. And I remember at one point, I think it was a Saturday night, we were hanging out in the lobby, just waiting to go out to dinner, and we see coming down the corridor toward the lobby is Ethan Peck and Anson Mount. They're walking side by side. They're not in costume. There's no prosthetics. There's nothing about them that would say Star Trek. And yet, the way they walked side by side, in perfect sync with each other, in perfect harmony, side by side, almost like brothers, you looked at them and you went, that is Pike and Spock.
Mhm.
That they were in character. They were in the zone. They had the chemistry. They meshed perfectly from the start. And my friends and I looked at that and we said, yeah, if they don't make a Pike series with those two, they're idiots. Because that right there, that's gold.
Yeah, yeah.
And we were right. It was gold.
Oh, it is. I mean, absolutely is. And I mean, the Strange New Worlds is amazing. And
Beautiful
to me,
show.
I like. There's a lot I liked about Discovery, but honestly, the whole Pike as a character, Spock as a character is just like amazing. Loved that.
Yeah.
You know, it's funny. So much of what we see brought to the screen, or brought to books, or brought to anything, is driven by business. And it's so hard as a fan to remember that sometimes, right? When you see
very
something
true.
that you love and you're like, they didn't do it right, or I wish they would have done it different. The reality is that sometimes there would be either nothing or that, because that's the way the business works, is if you're going to make it out there.
And sometimes there are just forces beyond creators' control. You do the best you can. I'm just going to remind fans. I mean, we all know this, but sometimes you need to be reminded. Nobody goes into this to deliberately make something that sucks. Nobody says, gee, could I make a really lousy Star Trek episode? Let's try that. No. Nobody does that. Everybody goes in wanting to say, this is going to be brilliant. This is going to be poignant. This is going to be awesome. And then life throws you a curveball. You've got this great idea, and the production designer comes back and says, it's a wonderful idea, and as soon as you dig up $100 million in small unmarked bills, we'll shoot it. Until then, I can't do this, I can't do that, and I can't do that. And no, you cannot blow that up.
Yeah.
Because we can't rebuild it. So what else would you like to do? You'll have to rewrite Act 3. But I love Act 3. We all love Act 3. But we can't shoot Act 3. We don't have the money.
Right.
Go rewrite Act 3. So you may have had the perfect story, and the fans will say, wouldn't it have been so much cooler if this and that and that thing, boom. Yeah, it would have, but we don't have the money. And very often, or we don't have the time. Or we don't have the actor. We've only got that actor for 4 days, and then we lose them because they're on CSI next week, and we can't get them back. So we don't have the time to shoot that. There are so many realities that a production crew has to deal with, and they've just got to deal with them in stride. They have to write and shoot and direct around them, sometimes in real time, as rugs just keep getting pulled out from under them, and they have to keep saying, okay, so if we can't do that, how do we preserve the spirit of what we want to do? And we need pages in 11 minutes. What can we do? And they've got to make fast decisions. That's why these people get paid, is because they can figure this stuff out fast on a set while a crew is waiting to shoot. And everybody's looking at the writer going, what are we going to do? Give me 5 minutes.
Right. Well, and I think that this happens with writers as well, because I mean, like, especially with media tie-in, you might say, like, here's my great story. They're going, you can't put it on that planet, and we can't tell you why.
Right. I tell you, I can't tell you how many times you come in with we've come in with a pitch of one type or another. Say, want to do this, this, and this, and then the editors come back. Yeah, you can't use that character, and you can't do that, and we can't buy that. We love that, but could you do it for a different series, and could you make it about this instead? To which the answer is always, well, of course I can do that. Sure. That's not a problem. Sure, that's not a problem. Issue a contract, and I'll get it done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But it's a great example of how the challenges that are often faced by creatives working within these known worlds, these shared IPs. And even if they're your own world, at some point you run up against well, if it's going to get printed, it's got to be done by this date and things like that.
That's right. That happened with the Shadow Commission, where originally I had finished a draft. I'd finished it on time. I turned it into my editor. And while I was waiting for my editor to give me feedback on book 3 of Dark Arts, I got the feedback from my agent. And my agent pointed out, some errors, or not really some errors, but some bad story choices that maybe left her scratching her head. And as I looked at it, I said, okay, she's right. And the best way to fix it is this. But if I do that, if I make this fix, if I pull that thread, I unravel the entire second half of the manuscript. And I suddenly realized, but I have to do that because that's a better story and it's a better ending. So I had to call up my editor and say, look, I know I already turned in the book. I know it was already considered on time. I need to pull it back. I need to basically pull everything after page 254. We need to throw it in the trash. I need to write a new outline for the second half of the book, and then I need to write a new second half of the book. And my editor, Jen Gunnels, a very talented woman, very understanding woman, she very patiently said, okay, if that's what you feel you need to do, we respect your choice. But just know, it will cause the book to slip. You were originally scheduled to appear in January of 2020, so we're going to have to bump it. I said, how far? What's the next possible slot? She says, well, we could get you August of 2020, but to do that, you would have to execute everything you've just said in the next 5 weeks. And I looked at my schedule. I said, let me get back to you. Give me 24 hours. Because I had to call up my editors at Trek, for whom I was scheduled to write a Star Trek novel starting right away. And I explained the situation to them. I said, look, can I push the deadline on this Trek book back by about 6 weeks? Can I start it 6 weeks later and hit this mark? Can we work around that? And they very graciously said, all right, we'll find a way to make that work for you. We'll pull that off for you, sure. So they did that, and then I was able to come back to Jen Gunnels and say, you give me 5 weeks, I'll give you a new ending. I'll hit that mark. And she didn't really believe me. She's like, you do understand, if you don't hit that mark, if I don't have that manuscript in hand on that date, we probably won't be able to publish you until 2021, maybe 2022. And I said, I'll hit it. I'll hit the mark. I'll hit it. And she just said, all right, good luck. 5 weeks later, I turned in a completely rewritten manuscript where the second half of the book had been redone. I had to reconceive it, replot it, and then rewrite it from scratch, from blank pages. And I did it in 5 weeks because I had to.
Then you passed out on the floor for a week and a half, woke up and sent it to your editor.
And then I reread the ending because I knew it was the ending of the series, and I wept. So
that's awesome. I mean, that's awesome to be able to get to that and package the whole thing up that way. It's very cool. But I think that really sort of helps to explain, one of the things we've talked about is the difference between the sort of classic vision of creativity and creation and the reality of it in a world where without the business side of it, no one ever knows what you created, right? Which might be fine for some folks, but it's just not for most artists and creators. A big part of it is sharing it. Now, speaking of sharing, before we get too far, we're running low on time here. If someone wanted to read one of your books today, they could probably get Oblivion's Gate.
Well, Oblivion's Gate is a hard spot to jump in. It is the third book in a trilogy, Star Trek Coda.
Yeah.
I collaborated on the trilogy with my good friends Dayton Ward and James Swallow. We've all worked together before on numerous projects, including Star Trek, 24, and some other stuff. And we conceived the plot of the entire trilogy together, so we share a story credit on the title page of each book. And then we individually wrote our particular volumes. Dayton wrote book 1, which was Moments Asunder. James wrote book 2, The Ashes of Tomorrow. And then I wrote book 3, Oblivion's Gate. This represents this trilogy represents the end of 20 years of interlinked Star Trek continuity that we've been doing in the books, going back to the year 2000, 2001. It started with the Deep Space Nine relaunch, books set after the end of Deep Space Nine, continuing the saga of DS9. And eventually that carried over to Next Generation, to Voyager, then to original series set during that time period, but which were original to the books. And for about 15, 20 years, we had free reign to do what we wanted because nobody thought there were ever going to be any more stories in that particular era of Star Trek after Nemesis. And then, a couple of years ago, we got word about Picard. And we suddenly realized that once Picard hit, inevitably, there was just going to be no way around it. They were going to establish details about that era, about recent history, things that had happened in the intervening years, where certain characters had ended up, and we knew they were going to blow our continuity out of the water. And the problem is that the Star Trek books are obligated to remain somewhat consistent, or actually they're not somewhat, consistent with the canon as it exists as they were written. And the problem is, once Picard hits, we know there's no way to retroactively revise the continuity. There's no way we can shoehorn our 20 years of shared literary world building in any way that makes it fit with Picard. At that point, we were boned. We were completely hosed. There was nothing you could do. We said, all right, well, once Picard hits, one of two things is going to happen. Either the 20 plus years of shared literary work that we've all done will simply come quietly to an end without acknowledgement, and we'll start publishing new books, either set during run of series or based on the new continuity or whatever. But this will just fade away, and it'll be treated as if we never did it, and it'll just linger. And fans will keep asking, are we ever going to see any more of that? And we'll keep telling them, well, no, not really. Yeah. Or, option two, some sort of capstone, some sort of dramatic, climactic ending is going to be written. And if that does happen, who do we want to see doing it? And I was pitching this idea to Dayton and James. I said, if this idea comes around, do we want someone else writing it, or do we want it to be us?
Right.
And so we took it upon ourselves to make a pitch for this rather climactic thing, the temporal apocalypse, as we call it, in which the timeline essentially has to be unraveled and reset and whatever. And it's not just a great tragedy in that our characters are up against a situation where they know there is no winning, there's only a way to not lose.
Right.
They all know they're going to their deaths. They all know that they're all going to get erased. The last 14 years of the lives that they've lived are going to get undone. But it's the only way to save the greater multiverse. It's a multi-verse story, but it's also this metatextual thing where the adventure that the characters are on and the sacrifices they are being asked to make are actually a commentary on what we as the tie-in writers who have been keeping this flame alive for 20 years with all of this shared work, being asked to burn down and sacrifice our work for the good of the canon. Coda basically became this allegory. It's a living allegory. It's about having to make the sacrifice, be the one to if you're the one being asked to fall on your sword.
Yeah,
and it's basically about that.
Right. I mean, that's the reality of it. I mean, there's a really elegant way to handle that problem because, Star Wars.
Not everybody thought so.
Recognized everything else. But, I personally find it to be a very elegant solution to a pretty big problem.
Oh,
right?
thank you.
How do you resolve it, right? And
we put a lot into it, a lot of passion.
Yeah. So you're telling me I'd have to read Star Trek?
Yes, go read Star Wars books instead. You don't want to read this.
Star Wars a minute ago. That's why I said it. The Star Trek books instead of one if I want to read yours.
Well, if you want to read Coda, I mean, we do recap all of that continuity, all that stuff. We recap it in a few pages at the start of each book of Coda. So yeah, you could read Oblivion's Gate all by its lonesome if you really wanted to. I think you might be a wee bit lost.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to mean more to people who have been longtime fans of the Star Trek literary continuity. But if you want to just jump in and just be part of the literary event, you probably do want to read the whole trilogy. You want to read all three books.
Oh, dang. Shoot. I have to.
Sorry.
That's awesome. Well, and I think that to anyone who is a fan of these and who's been reading these, wouldn't hurt, for example, to nominate Oblivion's Gate for a Dragon Con, a Dragon Award, right?
Dragon Award.
So,
Because, hey, it's free to nominate. All you need is an email address. And once you nominate, they'll immediately email you back to vote later on. Nominations, I believe, are open through, I think, July 19.
yeah, it sounds right. I'd have to pull it up, but yeah, but so don't wait. It's the moral of the story. Don't wait. Just get out there and do it now and make
But
sure.
please, if you'd be so kind, please nominate Oblivion's Gate as Best Media Tie-In Novel.
Oh, that would be fantastic.
I'm begging you. Please.
You've got another Star Trek book coming up, right?
I do.
It's Harm's Way, is that right?
Yeah, it's coming out on December 13 of this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I was approached by the editors. We were sitting down last year around Christmas time, and I was saying, is there anything else I could write for you guys? What do you need? What do you want? And what they asked me for was something that would bring back the Star Trek Vanguard saga that I wrote with Dayton Ward and Kevin Delmore, which I co-created with editor Marco Palmieri. They said, we want something that brings back Vanguard and crosses it over with Star Trek, the original series. And I said, I would love to do that. I mean, I didn't even have to pitch it. They asked for it. So I went away and I sort of examined the continuity and the timeline of Vanguard. And I said, all right, where in all of this can I drop in another novel-length story? And I found a spot. It basically takes place right around the middle of what is currently book 5 of the saga, Precipice. Mm-hmm. It takes place shortly, maybe about a month after Amok Time, in which Spock goes home and has that whole thing on Vulcan with T'Pring, the Caliphate. And it takes place maybe about a week or so after the events of the Doomsday Machine, when they fight the giant flying burrito in space.
Right. Oh, that's very cool. And that's December. That's going to be available.
December 13th. And I got to say, after the heavy, tragedy-laden thing that is Oblivion's Gate, I went 180 degrees in the other direction, and I just had a blast writing Harm's Way. It is a fast-paced, lighthearted, snark-filled adventure. It's meant to be light, it's meant to be funny, a little bit scary at points, but mostly it's just meant to be good, old-fashioned, classic Star Trek fun, with a Star Trek message at the core.
That's awesome. All right, well, we'll be watching for that one. We are almost out of time, but there's something we do at the end of every show, which is we like to highlight somebody who is either newer in the business or someone who has been in the business but really needs a spotlight. Like we've got you really should be reading this person. You have somebody, Mimi Mandal, is that correct?
Yes, Mimi Mandal is a good friend of mine. She is so far mostly an author of short fiction. She's also been one of the editors who's worked for Uncanny SF. She's worked for Penguin Random House in India, I believe. Mm-hmm. She has been, her first book, Luminescent Threads, Connections to Octavia E. Butler, it received the Locus Award for Nonfiction, and it was shortlisted for the Hugo Award in Best Related Work and the British Fantasy Award in Nonfiction. Mm-hmm. So she has been multiply nominated and has won some major awards. She is a wonderful short fiction writer. She's currently, I think, doing some work on maybe a media tie-in property, I think maybe an RPG or something. She's represented by the same agent that I am. She's with Lucienne Diver of the Night Agency. Mm-hmm. So editors, if you are looking for a writer with a terrific voice, a terrific authenticity, she comes from India. She has a really fascinating perspective, as she's an ethnic minority even in India. Mm-hmm. So she has this wonderful authenticity and this emotional, raw quality to her prose. I've heard her read from various works over the years. I've gone to several of her readings. They're always captivating. She is a tremendous voice, and I think that she's going to be a very important voice in the years and decades to come in science fiction and in fantasy. I think she's poised to break out. She is going to be a name, and I think that you ought to get to know her now. And editors, you ought to start building a relationship with her now and start hiring her to write stuff, because she's wonderful and she's a total sweetheart. And I think that she is such a wonderful writer. I really want her to get a bigger stage, and I want her to get a bigger fandom.
Yeah. All right. Well, folks, there's the web address. You can go see some of her stuff there. Definitely check it out because that would be very cool. It sounds like a very cool author who I'm looking forward to reading myself at this point. So that'd be great. Well, David, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you being on the show, Mr. Grandmaster, sir. And
I wanted to say that was my father, but no, he wasn't.
So thank you very much. And in the meantime, we'll be watching for your new books.
Thank you, Marc. It's been great being here.
All right. Well, folks, that's it. You've just spent another hour listening to us talk about all sorts of crazy things. Thank you so much for being a part of this. David's great. Make sure to check out his work, check out Mimi's work. Next week, we have someone's very special, Peter Atkinson. You might know him from the business he started, something called Wizards of the Coast, I think. So anyway, you might want to check us out next week as he's our guest. And thank you all for watching, and we'll see you next week.